I loved being a paramedic and firefighter. I miss it. It's like I know that I'm going to be going into the circus today. And after 20 years, I still don't know. I was still surprised. I'd go to work, see things I'd never seen before, and then I'd go home. The problem is that sometimes I'd take that home with me. I would get really depressed. Mostly in the morning is when I felt it the most. I'd wake up and then this big weight would come on me. Here's an art piece I did, and I asked myself, am I walking my trauma? Is my trauma walking me? So my psychologist said, Dan, I know you take photos and you create artwork. Why don't we pick one of these feelings and emotions that you're having, stage it, photograph it, and then create the artwork of it? And I thought that was a horrible idea.
Come and join Responder Resilience and the Fairfield County Trauma Response Team at the EMS and Fire Pro Expo and Conference at Foxwoods Resort Casino in Connecticut from October 24th through 26th, 2024. This is your chance to stay ahead of the curve in the constantly evolving first responder world. Registration includes continental breakfast and afternoon snacks, as well as 2 nights of fun social events. And this is an exceptional opportunity to hear national speakers. The exhibit hall is free to attend, so don't miss out on this incredible event. EMS and Fire Pro Expo, Foxwoods, October 24th through 26th, 2024. Mark your calendars and join us for an unforgettable experience. Special note, if you're listening to this episode on audio, you'll be missing out on seeing over 150 of Daniel Sundahl's amazing art pieces as he narrates his post-traumatic growth journey on this episode. To see Daniel's incredible art, check out the full video version at respondertv.com. Welcome to Responder Resilience. Along with my co-hosts, Bonnie Rumley, LCSW, EMT, and Dr. Stacy Raymond, I'm David Dashinger. Today we have a real treat for you as we welcome back internationally recognized artist, advanced care paramedic, and retired firefighter Daniel Sundahl. He'll be taking us on a visual narrative exploration of resilience and transformation as we watch and listen to his story of personal growth and post-traumatic growth. Bonnie, Stacy, and I had the opportunity to see Dan do this presentation in New York about a month or so ago, and it was a profound experience. So buckle up. It's going to be a very interesting show. I invite you to like and subscribe YouTube, Responder Resilience, Facebook, Responder Wellness Inc., and Responder TV, LinkedIn, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and go to our website, respondertv.com, for past episodes and guest information. We'll be right back to speak with Dan and watch his presentation after this.
In this family, more of us die by our own hands than by the hazards of the job.
In this family, up to a quarter of 911 telecommunicators have symptoms of post-traumatic stress.
In this family, our mental health and wellness are in crisis,
while responders are quietly suffering.
In this family, many struggle with job-related stress,
burnout, trauma, sleep disruptions, substance abuse,
and relationship problems.
In this family, we can help the helpers.
with vital information and resources,
resilient strategies,
and success stories of overcoming the obstacles.
In this family, no one is alone.
Welcome to Responder Resilience with co-hosts retired Lieutenant David Dashinger, Dr. Stacy Raymond, and Bonnie Rumley, LCSW, EMTB. We'd like to welcome back Daniel Sundahl to Responder Resilience. Dan is an internationally recognized artist, writer, advanced care paramedic, pre-hospital educator, and retired firefighter, and he now has a new cert to add to his list. We'll talk about that in a second. He's the president and founder of the Recovery and Resiliency Foundation, a charitable organization that helps support people living with symptoms of trauma. With 4 art books and numerous features in global publications, Daniel's work speaks volumes about occupational stress injuries and post-traumatic growth. He dedicates his time to creating powerful photo art, blending photography and graphic design based on his experiences as a paramedic and firefighter. His art aims to reduce the stigma of PTSD among first responders. And breaking news, he's recently graduated as a counseling therapist. Congratulations, Dan.
Great. Thanks, David, and Stacy and Bonnie. Thanks for having me on your show again.
Welcome to our other world.
I'm excited.
Good.
I have my bulldog here who wants to play. So if you hear any weird noises, that
I wondered what that was. It sounded like a newborn baby. You know?
It's very similar, yeah. But he has no concept of, he doesn't understand why I'm talking and it's not to him. So he's going to be wanting my attention. So you might see him zip behind me, but what I have to do.
There you go. You gotta have all the distractions prepared.
Yeah.
All right. So Dexter and Dan Sundahl will.
Yeah. Dexter may make some appearances here too.
All right, ready to go.
All right, you guys see that all right?
Yes.
Okay, great. So today I'm going to talk about post-traumatic growth, and I need to do a little bit of a disclaimer at first. I do use angels and demons to represent trauma and recovery in the artwork. I am going to show you lots of art pieces that are original art pieces that I created. They are photo based, so they start as photographs and then I digitally draw and paint on top of them. Now, none of them are actual photos of me on scene, but they're all based on calls that I've attended. And you're going to see these images of angels and demons that represent trauma and recovery. And because the artwork that I create is part of my recovery process, I don't censor them. So I don't, you may look at them and attach your own experiences to them, and potentially they could be triggering because I don't censor them. If I censor them, then it's not going to be therapeutic for me. So I have to be very authentic in creating the artwork. So you're going to see some things that may connect with you on a deeper level. I really like this saying when discussing post-traumatic growth of, pain plus the unwillingness to have pain equals trauma. Whereas the pain plus the willingness to walk into that pain equals growth. And for me, when I went through my post-traumatic growth journey, I really had to walk into that pain. I don't know if I would say I was very willing at first because it scared the crap out of me a little bit. But the more I did it and my therapist kind of explained to me how the process has to work, then the more I walked into the pain, the more I grew. I like this idea of being tragically optimistic. And that's why I created this art piece. And the bulldog is me, the cherry blossom tree, so you look at it and it's this beautiful pink tree and the bulldog is there. He's at peace. There's nature around. There is a lemur or meerkat, and he's my protector. And he can see he's looking out for danger. And if you look in the far kind of bottom left, there's a man hanging on a noose, which represents my danger, which is suicide. So the talk today is really about being tragically optimistic, meaning I have to be authentic in what has happened to me. I need to face the things I've experienced in order for me to recover. So overall, I'm optimistic, but I need to be tragic in a sense. The opposite of being tragically optimistic is being a toxic positivist, where it's like, oh, I'm fine. And you sweep everything under the rug until you trip over all the stuff that's underneath your rug and crack your melon. But tragically optimistic in the terms of being in post-traumatic growth was a big part of my recovery. Here's a painting I did for my psychologist. And here's a paramedic. The paramedic is me. He is surrounded by his trauma. He has a tourniquet on his arm. He has a syringe full of narcotics, and this poor fellow's about to take his life. And what I want to talk about a little bit today is how he got there, but more importantly, how he gets out. And then we're going to return back to this image, and I'm going to explain kind of the real reason why I created it, the purpose or the motivation of creating it. So I'm going to use this analogy of this seed or this bean of when I talk about post-traumatic growth, where this seed has to crack open in order for some things to grow. There needs to be some destruction. So I like this analogy of using this seed or this bean when talking about post-traumatic growth. So I'll reference this graphic throughout the presentation. So what happened to me? Here's a couple images of the fire department that I worked at. I was a full-time paramedic firefighter for 20 years, and probably maybe 10 years in, the city hired a psychologist to come and speak with everybody in the city, not just the emergency services, to talk about post-traumatic stress. And when I think about it now, that's pretty forward thinking for the city to do that such a long time ago. And we were on shift, and my captain said, "Hey, Dan, our whole platoon needs to go and listen to this guy talk about mental health." And we're all like, "Oh my God, listen to this guy talk about mental health." So we all went, we're on shift. And as he was going through the signs and symptoms of trauma, I really connected with a lot of them. I never thought that I had PTSD. I never considered it because I never had that one call where I thought I was different after. But when he started mentioning that many of his clients he diagnosed over a long career, a long period of stressors over time, then I started thinking, hey, well, maybe some of these symptoms that he was talking about that I had was because of the traumatic experiences from my job. And I never really considered that before. And here are some of the symptoms that I had. After our meeting, we went back to the fire hall, and I asked the guys in my platoon, I'm like, hey, did you guys connect with any of that stuff? And they says, no, of course not. And I'm like, yeah, no, me neither. And then I went the next day, I called, made an appointment, and was diagnosed with PTSD. And I was shocked. I was so surprised because I had no idea. Yeah, these are the symptoms that I have, which are common symptoms of trauma. So sleep disorder, really hard time falling asleep, hard time staying asleep, not having quality sleep, waking up in the middle of the night. I became very apathetic, stopped caring about the things I used to care about. I became very withdrawn and not wanting to socialize with people. I didn't want to be around. Even at work, I wanted to stay in my room. We were lucky that we had individual quarters there. I didn't want to go on dates with my wife. And what was happening is I was starting to feel afraid. I was scared because my things weren't as expected. And I didn't want to go out for dates. I didn't want to go out in public. I would tell myself that I didn't like people, but the truth was I was feeling very vulnerable. The one thing that made me feel a little bit better was food. That was kind of my coping mechanism. So I would eat. Many of us turn to drugs and alcohol, but for me, it was food, cinnamon buns in particular. And I gained a lot of weight, which makes it difficult to be an emergency worker when you're overweight. I had physical numbness. My left arm got numb. And what I've learned now is that trauma really displays itself physically in many ways. And for me, I was having numbness in my left arm. And I thought I was having a heart attack. I was on shift, got a 12 lead put on. And sure enough, I had ST elevation, 2-3 AVNF. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm having a jammer. Went to the hospital. Cardiologist was there. And he says, no, you're not having a heart attack. You're fine. I'm like, okay, well, and he said, the reason you have the ST elevation is because you're Scandinavian and you have early repolarization. I'm like, well, I guess that's good news, I guess. But he couldn't determine why I had this numbness in my arm. And once I realized what was happening to me, the numbness actually started going away. And I didn't realize that trauma can display itself in a physical way in the body. And I've learned a lot about that too, especially with Bessel van der Kolk's work. It's really fascinating. Very easy to anger. And for me, if we go back to the fear aspect of I felt I was losing control of the things I had control of. So it scared me. And as I was trying to regain that control, it kind of was expressed in anger. So my fuse got really short and it burned really, really hot, which got me into a lot of trouble at home and at work. My confidence shrunk, which made it really difficult as an advanced care paramedic and a PALS and ACLS instructor. So that started to affect my work. I was overcome with emotion in the weirdest times. I would start crying for no reason buying groceries, driving in my car, and I really didn't understand why I was feeling so emotional at seemingly for no reason. My sex drive dropped to 0, which caused a lot of problems, of course. And of course, my wife perceived that as me not finding her attractive or not loving her or not wanting to be intimate. But the truth was I didn't want to love anything. I didn't have joy for anything. I had invasive thoughts. So when I would try to empty my mind and try to relax, all this weird stuff would come into my mind. I wasn't able to, meditate or be mindful because all these things would invade my consciousness. I had memory gaps. I would forget what my medication dosages were. I'd forget, which the rules of the road. I would forget who had the right of way. Things that I would normally know right away, I just stopped. I didn't remember them. I became disassociated, which I now have learned that it was essentially my body trying to escape, my mind trying to escape itself. I was splitting. I was becoming fractured. And I would feel like I was doing a ride along with myself when I was working, or I would recognize the environment that I was in, but it wouldn't seem familiar. I was becoming separated from myself. It was a really odd sensation. I would start to see things. I would start to hear things. I was sensitive to really loud noises because I was hypervigilant all the time. So my acuity to hearing changed. I became very anxious, especially if I heard things that sounded like the tones of my radio, or if I saw fire trucks or ambulances or emergency services vehicles, I would get anxious. Where in the past, I would get really excited about those things. I would get really depressed. Mostly in the morning is when I felt it the most. I'd wake up and then this big weight would come on me. And it would be worse the day before my shift. And then that day of my shift is kind of anticipation leading up. The depression increased. I would have thoughts of death and dying, thinking that, I guess this is the start of suicidal thinking of, if I die at work today, I'm not going to practice my self-rescue techniques. If I die at work, then I'm a hero. My family's taken care of. So I didn't at that time have a plan, but eventually that did develop into an actual plan for suicide. And when I think back on it now, it is actually quite scary because all these things were happening to me. And I didn't know that they were because of how trauma affected the neurology of my brain. I didn't realize that it was so insidious in its way of sneaking up on me. Here's a picture I did called The Thirsty Horse. So here's a horse. It's dying. The horse is me. It's at its recovery. At this case, it's the peer support. And it's being blinded by its trauma. So I didn't even know that I needed help. So I never asked. I never utilized my EAP program, my employment assistant programs. I never thought to reach out. I thought that I was okay because I had my solution. I'm going to take my life and then I'll be okay, which is really weird when I think about it now, how much that altered my cognitive thinking of, I didn't want to die, but I thought if I killed myself, then I would be okay. I wouldn't feel the things I was feeling anymore. So I had my answer. I never thought to ask for help. I didn't even think there's anything wrong with that. So here's a couple images that represents that idea. And I call it being like the false okay of, I would go to work. I would pretend to everyone that I was fine. And I would plan to take my life. And didn't want anyone to know. And it's weird when I think about it now, how odd that is for me. And I've spoken to many of our peers that are in a similar situation where it just changes your brain so much. So here's the firefighter. He looks okay. His button says I'm fine, but he's got his trauma behind him. His helmet says, please help me. Because there are signs that I was displaying that I wasn't aware of at the time. My friend, Dr. Olivia Johnson, who I think has been on your show as well, and she's come up with the Fatal 10. And she uses these Fatal 10 as a way to almost inoculate organizations. And what the Fatal 10 is she investigates, her and her team, they investigate suicides. This particular Fatal 10 is for law enforcement. She's now come up with lots of different specific professions for them. But she investigates them and determines what the most common factors are. And I was displaying many of these factors. So here are the top 10. So other major life events like job changes, divorce, moving, pending or nearing retirement. It's number 9. Number 8 is under investigation. Many of these law enforcement officers had firearm access, so most of them did, or all of them did. They had other underlying medical issues. They had mental health concerns, so they were worried about their mental health. They had sleep disturbances. They had cumulative trauma and stress versus that one acute trauma. The second most common factor in these suicides is substance abuse and addiction. And the number one factor for law enforcement suicide, a common factor, is interpersonal relationship issues, which is an area that I'm really going to focus on. I'm going to focus on those top three, I guess, as a counselor. So I was actually displaying many of these signs. So although I was thinking I was faking it to everybody that I was okay, I was displaying several of these top 10 risk factors for suicide. So here I am, and I've realized, or I didn't realize, somebody told me that, hey, Dan, that's suicide maybe isn't a solution. There's another way. And I was tuned in and realized that I actually had an injury and that I needed help. So my seed's been cracked and busted. So my solution is still to create this artwork. At first, I thought it was a horrible idea. So my psychologist said, Dan, I know you take photos and you create artwork. Why don't we pick one of these feelings and emotions that you're having, stage it, photograph it, and then create the artwork of it? And I thought that was a horrible idea. I'm like, I don't want to think about this stuff. I don't want to step into it. I just want you to give me a pill so that I can get back to work. And he goes, no, Dan, it doesn't work that way. You need to step into it in order for it to work. You have to process it. So that's what I did. And he was right. These are the first few that I did. And I never planned to share these images with anybody because they were so personal to me. And I created them to purge these things out of my head. So I never intended to share them. So I didn't for the longest time. And when I decided to share them with the few friends I had on social media, mostly because I thought, they looked kind of cartoony, they kind of looked cool. I decided to share them, very scared to share them, felt very vulnerable because I thought for sure that people would not accept them, or they would ask me or tell me, Dan, why are you showing us in these vulnerable states? But the exact opposite happened. Once I didn't realize that my peers would look at the artwork and attach their own experiences to it and allow them to process it as well. And I didn't know that was going to happen. And that was wonderful for me because that really validated how I was feeling. It really made me feel that it was okay to feel this way and that I wasn't alone. I had this weird feeling of death. My relationship with death changed over time. So I started to incorporate him in a lot of the artwork that I did. Because I always thought that as a paramedic, I was going to save everybody. That's kind of how I thought when I was in school, or I was going to save most people. But over time, I realized that, death comes as a comfort to a lot of people. So I incorporated him in a lot of the images. In my recent images that I've done, I've included the Grim Reaper as more of a compassionate, empathetic figure versus this evil, mean thing that you usually see him in. Here he is behind the nurse. He knows it's time. The nurse knows it's time. The spirit of the patient is trying to unplug his own life support because he knows it's time. Yet the family member is really begging us to save their family, their loved one. And that caused me a lot of moral injury, I guess. It's difficult to see in this one, which represents a death notification, a proper death notification. The Grim Reaper is actually walking in the front door, and the spirit of the patient is standing almost right in the middle of the room there. This is in Poland, so the Grim Reaper is there, and Poland was great. They have free education there. Both these paramedics have advanced degrees. One has a master's, one other has a PhD. And this represents them realizing the heart has stopped And this is called the in-between, where they're about to defibrillate and the spirit is there. Here's another one from Poland where they defibrillate, shock the spirit right out of this patient. Again, 2 paramedics with advanced degrees. They only get paid $4 an hour to work on that ambulance, but they have great protocols because their education is so high. It was a wonderful experience to be there. And what I discovered by creating this artwork is that I was able to reconfigure how I remembered these situations. So here's one, looks really sad, but this was a very healing image for me, because after creating it, I was able to remember this girl, of how she is with her teddy bear, showing me compassion versus how I actually saw her. So after completing this image, I was able to remember it, but I wasn't having the emotional response that was attached to the memory that usually came when I recalled or had a flashback of that actual call. And then this is my dog, Dexter. We're talking about things that I do to make me feel better. And Dexter, I've always had bulldogs. I'm not sure what they say about, do bulldogs, do humans choose their animals, or do animals choose their humans, and how dogs look like their owners? I don't know how that is, but I've always had bulldogs. I've had lots of them, and they have lots of character, and I love them. And Dexter is no different. And when I was working on the ambulance, we had 2 bulldogs, and they would always know. So dog therapy or animal therapy, for me, was a big part of my cover, and it's still a big part of my mental health. So here's my seed. It's been busted open. It's very emotional to create the artwork. I try to recreate how I felt versus what I see, and it really sometimes is really tough. Takes a long time. Takes about a week to create each one. But I'm building new neural pathways in my brain. I'm building new connections. Some of the old connections are starting to get pruned over, and my brain is actually changing. So with these new neural pathways, I'm now having this post-traumatic growth. So things are actually, I feel different because the new pathways I'm creating weren't even there even before my trauma. So by definition, post-traumatic growth is a positive psychological change as a result of adversity in order to rise to a higher level of functioning. And if we think about post-traumatic growth, it's nothing really new. If you think of the origin story of most superhero stories is centered around post-traumatic growth. If you think Batman, who sees his parents get murdered and that makes him want to fight crime, Spider-Man gets bit by a spider, the Hulk, gamma radiation, Wonder Woman, all these superheroes, something happens to them, and now they have these superpowers or these super abilities because of the trauma. Now, of course, those are all fictional. However, I see examples of post-traumatic growth in so many of our peers and so many people, so much that we have a conference every year centered around post-traumatic growth and people coming to discuss their experiences with post-traumatic growth. And I think it's a really hopeful message. It's like the silver lining or this gold lining around this dark cloud of trauma. So here's a graph that represents post-traumatic growth adapted from O'Leary and Ikovics in 1995, where your normal, this is based on, you have that one adverse event, that one call that makes you essentially become impaired. And the idea is that we want to recover. The speed we recover at is based on our resiliency, how quickly we can bounce back. But through rewiring your brain, you can surpass that recovery line and go into that post-traumatic growth reconfiguration. Now, this is more like what my graph would look like. It was a lot of adverse events over a long period of time. And yes, I've rewired my brain, but it doesn't mean I'm in a constant line of this post-traumatic growth. I still wake up and feel depressed sometimes. But the difference now is that I recognize it and I know what to do when that happens. So I have like this tool belt of, okay, if I'm feeling bad one day and I recognize what's happening, I know how to avert that. Here's a art piece I did for a Calgary police officer, and she's looking inside this kintsugi bowl. And what a kintsugi bowl is this Japanese art form where they take this bowl and they smash it, and then they repair it using this gold lacquer. And the idea is that this repaired bowl with this gold lacquer is more beautiful and has more character than it did before it was damaged. And I thought that was a great analogy for post-traumatic growth, that after being repaired, after building these new neural pathways, I'm actually better than I was before my bowl was broken, so to speak. So here she is. She's looking into an empty kintsugi bowl, and she has this fiery phoenix growing out of her back. A big part of my recovery was perceptions, or restructuring how I viewed things, because I couldn't see the forest amongst the tree because my tree was on fire. So for me, the big part of perceptions, and what I've learned now for many people, when we try to reframe how they're thinking, is they change how they view themselves, changes in perspective and life, or the worldview, and that eventually will change relationships, which gets us back to the interpersonal relationship issue. So part of the post-traumatic growth phase really, for me and clinically, is really changing the perspectives of how we see things. The other thing I realized is that I had to get help. So I really needed to, I thought I'd just get better and better and better. I thought tomorrow's going to be fine. But I had to make the decision that, no, I need to get help. Just like if you break a leg, you can't just walk that off. You need to get some help for that. I needed to take my life back. I needed to make that conscious decision. Okay, this needs to be an active process, not a passive process for me to get better. So like this paramedic, I need to cross this bridge and really face what's happening to me in order for me to recover. This is weird for a firefighter to say, but I needed to separate my job from who I was. So my job is not who I am. When I'm at work, I'm a paramedic, I'm a firefighter. When I'm at home, I'm a husband, I'm a stepdad, and I had to make that separation. And it was really difficult to do that. I had to devote my energy to where it matters. And that was a very active process as well, where I would catch myself having these negative thoughts, or we'd be at work and we'd all just start to complain about certain things. And we just ruminate on it, and I'd recognize that, yeah, that was kind of ruining my day. It kind of wrecked my mood for the whole day. So I had to recognize when that was happening and either walk away from people or walk away from those conversations. So I needed to devote the energy to where it needed to be. And when I was at home, I needed to be more attentive there and put my energy there. And that was a very conscious effort as well. And it wasn't easy to do because it didn't seem natural at first. I had to limit my exposures to stressors. I was the practicum coordinator at my fire department. And so I told my chief that as I was starting to go through this stuff, I'm like, hey, I need to pass this on to somebody. And he understood. He was an old medic, and he understood what I was going through. And it was perceived by some of the other people on the department that I wasn't engaged in the department anymore. But the truth was, I had to decide what was stressing me out, and which ones were controllable or uncontrollable stressors. I actually wrote them out on a piece of paper. What stressors can I release myself from, and which ones can't I? So I had to really identify the stressors that I had and eliminate them. I used my sick time. Never took advantage of my sick time. Never, ever, ever took advantage of my sick time. Never thought like, oh, it's a sunny day today, I'm going to call in sick. Because in my department, if I call in sick, then usually someone else in the department is going to get moved, or they're going to have to pay the price. It's going to make their shift worse. So I never took advantage of my sick time, but I did use it. We were unionized. We had, I had lots of bank sick time. So I did utilize it. And that was negatively looked upon in my department if you use too much of your sick time. I don't listen to slow, sucky emotional music. Sometimes I do. Sometimes I will if I'm being creative and I'm in my studio here and I'm creating artwork, then I have a playlist specifically for creativity. But if I wake up in the morning and I'm feeling really sad and depressed, I do not listen to Taylor Swift's Folklore album, which I really like. Because that will just make me feel more depressed and I start to ruminate. I have a separate playlist that I do listen to when I feel sad and depressed. It's more upbeat, very vibrant music. So for me, music, I realized was a big component on how my mood is. It really affected my mood. So I started using that to my advantage. I strive to be a better version of myself. This was really easy to do and it was super effective. But there's a couple sides to this coin. here's an art piece I did. And I ask myself, am I walking my trauma? Is my trauma walking me? And whichever one I believe is happening is actually happening. So if I wake up in the morning and think, yeah, I look at myself in the mirror, I'm like, yeah, you're a piece of shit, or I'm feeling sad, then I'm going to manifest that. Then that's who I'm going to be. But if I wake up and don't think those things, then that's who I'm going to be. And there's been a lot of research in how our thought processes actually do manifest our realities. Some really interesting research, particularly by Dr. H. Lipton. So the character of our life is based upon how we perceive it. It's like if we think we're smart, we're smart. If we think something is hard, then it's hard. If we think something is easy, it's easy. As soon as you start to tell yourself in your perception that you can't do something anymore, then your biological system will adjust to prove you right. You will not do what you think you can't do. Again, these are quotes from Dr. Bruce Lipton. He's doing some really incredible research of how our thought process is actually changing our physiology. If I don't, this is an image I wrote about attachment to my trauma, where I started to feel that if I am not someone with PTSD, then who am I? It scared me to not have it over time. So this is me actually embracing my trauma and feeling that it was actually a sense of comfort for me. And that's a really difficult roadblock if we're thinking of recovery, to get past that, to realize that in this case, this devil's a liar. He thinks that you're doing okay and comforting, but the truth is you're not. So perception for me was a big part of my recovery, of how I thought I was. I am what I think I am. I have to be vulnerable. When I create the artwork, I need to be true to myself. So if I go back to the idea of being tragically optimistic, I need to be vulnerable and I need to be authentic in what's happening to me. I can't sugarcoat stuff. I can't censor it in order for me to be a truer version of myself. So I need to be vulnerable, and that comes out a lot in my artwork. Diet for me is a big thing, and this is something that I recently have gotten into. I've done a lot of education in it, taken a lot of specialized courses where I'll be offering my clients ketogenic diets for mental health. And when I switched my diet to a ketogenic diet, my depression was gone. It didn't lessen, it disappeared. And I was diagnosed with depression 30 years ago, and I've been on medication ever since. The medication helped, but once I decreased my systemic inflammation, decreased my insulin resistance, increased my ketone reduction, and made my mitochondria, my brain healthier, my depression was gone, and I'm not on medication for that anymore. So the mental aspects of having a diet that emphasizes or promotes good mental biology for your brain just makes total sense. And there's lots of research that shows that, diet for mental health, or ketogenic diets, or metabolic psychiatry, or nutritional psychiatry really makes a lot of sense. And it's something that we don't really talk enough about. But for me, diet was a massive, probably even more so than my artwork, as far as my mental health and journey to post-traumatic growth. I realized I'm not alone. So when I started creating the artwork and was getting all this feedback, I realized that, hey, I'm not alone in how I'm feeling. When I created this picture, this is April in 2020, right when COVID was kind of at its peak or beginning. All these people started sending me these first responders or emergency workers were sending me their selfies of them at work with all their personal protective equipment on. And I thought, hey, we all kind of look the same. We all are wearing this same uniform now. So I decided I'm going to paint these portraits people are sending me. So each of these, there's 1,000 portraits here, and each one is Dan Sundahl, and I have the city or the country that they're from. So it's 1,000 portraits, 1,310 people. There's a pug. There's a nurse holding a pug here, and it's 67 different countries. And this really made me feel like that I'm not alone, especially at that time. I define my top 10 core values. And what this is I realize that my core values determine my behaviors. So I'm like, well, I'm going to reverse engineer my behaviors. So I identified my top 10 core values. And when I'm feeling bad about something, I can look at my phone. This is a screenshot of my phone, and my backdrop is my core values. So I have my 10 core values. So if I'm feeling upset or sad about something, I can identify which core value it is, and then I validate it. So then I think, is that someone else making me feel this way, or is it internally validating that core value? So I kind of take that power back. And I use this to really control how I behave in a certain way. It's been very helpful for me. And it works the other way too. So if I feel really great about something, I'm feeling really happy about something, then I can identify which core value is being stimulated. I'm like, yeah, this is why I'm feeling great right now, because this is the core value that's making me feel this way. And I feel this way, and that determines my behaviors. So I use this as a tool to navigate my way out of feeling bad and getting out of it. I reverse engineer my behaviors. It's been super. I do a totally separate presentation on core values for reverse engineering your behaviors and taking your power back. Once I've done that, then I decided, okay, well, I'm going to feel the emotion. Not that I don't want to try to deny the feelings I'm having, but I'll have those feelings. Let's say if I have a flashback or I have a feeling of a past call and it's made me feel sad and depressed, I feel, okay, well, why am I sad or depressed? And I narrow it down. And I'm not trying to deny the feelings. I'm feeling the feelings, but then I need to decide, okay, what am I going to do about it? And then I make the decision tree of, okay, well, I have 4 options. I can change the situation. I can learn to live with the situation, change my perspective on it, really is what that means. I can remove myself from the situation, or I can do nothing and suffer the consequences. So I simplify it down to those 4 choices. And I use this a lot. I know it's a lot more complicated than this, but it sometimes makes this overwhelming feeling of these bad emotions and simplifies it and gives me a tool to navigate my way through it. So let's say I'm at work and I'm having an argument with my supervisor or my boss. You know, what can I go through my core values? I'm like, okay, this is what it was. And I've internally validated it. So the power's in me and no one else is controlling my core values. Okay, but how am I going to deal with this feeling I'm having? I can either alter or change the stressor. I can talk to my supervisor. I'm like, hey, this is what's going on. Is there a way? Here's an alternative. Can we change it? He may say, well, no, we don't have the budget for it. We can't do it. This is why. So, and then I need to learn to live with that stressor. How can I perceive it in a different way? How can I change my perspective on it and check to see if I'm having any cognitive distorted thinking? I could quit. The third option is I could remove myself from the situation. Extreme case in this example would be to quit that job. And where a lot of us stand is the 4th option, where we do nothing and just suffer the consequences. So I utilize this decision tree of what I'm going to do. Quite often, I use that core value in the decision tree when things get challenging for me, and it's very effective for me. And I do teach other people how to utilize that. I am very lucky that I get to travel around the world and talk to many of our peers, and I ask them, what are some of the things that you do to make you feel better? This isn't research-based. It's not best practice. A lot of them are actually, they turn out to be, but the reason they made this list is because our peers have told me that they've done it and it works for them. So I'll go through these things. Critical stress management. I'm a big supporter of that. Most places use it. I think it's fantastic. The debriefing, diffusing, talk therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy. What my therapist did is he used cognitive processing therapy, which is like talk CBT, but it's more centered around trauma. EMDR is amazing. It's worked for, I've talked to hundreds of people where it's really been incredible treatment modality for them. Havening, which is this technique where you stimulate certain parts of your body, like your palms, your hands, or your shoulders, which is supposed to really release endorphins and dopamine in your brain, makes you feel better. Accelerated resolution therapy. Sometimes this is called art therapy, but what this is that it helps you remove or change how you remember something so you don't have the emotional response to it. Equine therapy, we do a whole other presentation on that. I've seen horses do incredible things and how they connect with people. that are suffering from traumatic symptoms. Ketamine, MDMA, cannabinoids, psychedelic therapies, lots of research being done in this area as well, with incredible results. Stellate ganglia block, put this big needle in your neck and they numb this stellate ganglia and your symptoms of trauma are gone for quite a long time. Problem is sometimes it numbs half your face for a few hours. You look like you've had a stroke, but I've talked to people where it's been very effective for them. Service dogs, service lizards, service whatever animals that you connect with are for me and a lot of people fantastic. Reconsolidation of traumatic memories. This is another technique. I think it's similar to EMDR. I'm not an expert in any of these things, but they kind of use it more of like a movie screen where you vision your life, your experience as a movie as they reconsolidate where your memories are placed. Art, music, fitness, yoga, 100%. I do lots of art, lots of music. Acupuncture and Reiki, if we believe and we know that trauma stored in the body is energy. And if we want to increase the flow of that energy, then acupuncture and Reiki make a lot of sense when treating trauma. Transcranial magnetic stimulation, TMS. This, I believe, is primarily used for severe depression. And it's these magnets they put on your head and they magnetize your brain. And the idea is that it reconnects your amygdala with your frontal lobe. And it's had a lot of positive effects. It's been very effective for several people, emergency workers that I've talked to. Trauma release exercises. I've done this and it kind of freaked me out. It's when you can release the trauma that's stored in your body. And there's a video on YouTube that you can watch where this impala gets attacked by this lion or something, and then it gets distracted. So the lion runs away and the impala is in this freeze response where it's just on the ground. It stands up and it shakes like it's having a seizure for a long time. And then it runs away. And what's happening is that the impala is just releasing that stored trauma. So we can, as humans, we don't really do that. But through this TRA trauma release exercises, you're able to release the stored trauma. Sauna, cold plunge, they do that in Finland. Every new fire hall in Finland has a sauna, which I think is great. Try to get that happening here, but it just doesn't seem to be working yet. Forest bathing. So in Japan, they call this the Shinrin-yoku, where they spend time in nature. Here we call it ecotherapy, of spending time in nature and connecting with nature. This is me and Dexter forest bathing. We do this every day where he's a bulldog, so he doesn't walk as far as I can. So he gets a ride in his little cart and we spend time going through the forest. And it just makes me feel better being in nature that way. So I've rewired my brain. I'm actually better, different than I was before I even became a paramedic. So I'm in this post-traumatic growth phase. Going back to this picture that I created for my therapist, his perspective, his trauma is immense, infinite. But from we look at it, from where we see, the trauma is fairly close to his body. And we can see where he is. This is in Cultus Lake in British Columbia, which is a beautiful place near Vancouver. And he can't see that he's in this beautiful environment because he's blinded by his trauma. But if he can find his way out, or someone can reach in and pull him out, his perception will change and he'll realize that he's in a beautiful environment and that he has alternatives to what he's planning to do. I am going to do, actually this weekend, I have my first couples workshop, couples for first responders and how trauma triggers relationship issues. So as a therapist, I'm going to do a lot of work on helping couples understand how trauma affects relationships and how damaging it can be. So I'm really excited about this weekend where we're having our first couples workshop for first responders, where I can hopefully help them understand and communicate and reconnect once they realize what's happening. Substance abuse and addiction was the number 2 on the list of Dr. Johnson's Fatal 10. And that's different as well. To treat that as a secondary problem to trauma is different than treating it if trauma wasn't there, as a coping mechanism and discovering what are these substances fulfilling? What needs are they fulfilling for you? And when it comes to trauma, that could be lots of different things. Here's an image I did called the cozy blanket. So here's a paramedic or firefighter. He's wrapping this blanket that says suicide. And I felt that suicide was like this cozy blanket that I could wrap myself around and that I would be okay. This is my favorite picture. Still on the topic of suicide. Again, I'm very authentic about talking about these things, but I think it's important to be real. So here's a paramedic who, actually this one's called The Demon Eats the Ambulance Driver. And I got a lot of slack for that, for calling him an ambulance driver. But this paramedic is not defending himself. He is not trying to fight off his demon. He is literally being consumed by his trauma. This image, for me, represents the act of suicide, of succumbing and literally being consumed by trauma. You look at this one's called Finding Peace. Looks sad initially, but this paramedic is getting the help that he needs. In the top right-hand corner, his trauma is there, the devil is there, and he's screaming. Here he is, because he doesn't have the grip on that paramedic, because his paramedic is getting the help that he needs. So it doesn't have to be like the picture on the left. It can be like the picture on the right. I want to talk a little bit about stigma. We think that stigma doesn't really have any teeth, or just, smash the stigma, or something happens, come forward. But that happens. People are coming forward and they're losing their jobs, or they're being blackballed, or there's a lot of negative attributes. There's stereotypes that are happening that are affecting their jobs and their interpersonal relationships. No one's going to say that this kid isn't a hero. Of course, he's a hero. But what about this Marine? For some reason, this Marine doesn't have that same hero status. And sadly, the current count is 22 of these men and women die by suicide every day. But I think because of the stigma, they don't have that same hero status, which I think is really sad. Here's an image I did after a firefighter in our area died by suicide. And the next day I was in the hallways with our patients, and I heard my peers, we all knew this guy, and they were saying, how could he do this? How could he do this to his family? He took the easy way out. And I got really upset, and I went up to them and said, hey, would you say that if someone was in a high-rise building and the building was on fire and they chose to jump out the window rather than being burned to death? And they're like, well, no, that's different. I'm like, is it? For me, I didn't really want to die, but it came to a choice of, do I want to continue feeling these feelings every day, being burned, if I use that metaphor, or jumping out the window? And for me, things got so bad that I thought I'd jump out the window. So here's an image that is showing that this firefighter is being stigmatized still, even in his death after suicide. But it's not all doom and gloom in emergency services. I'm so happy that mental health is become more prominent in our industry. But people are ask me, why did you stay in it so long? Or why don't you just quit? Why do you want to be in a job where it's so dangerous for you? Well, there's lots of reasons why. I loved being a paramedic and firefighter. I miss it. It's like, I know that I'm going to be going into the circus today. And after 20 years, I still don't know. I was still surprised. And I'd go to work. We'd work 24-hour shifts. I'd go to work, see things that I'd never seen before, and then I'd go home. The problem is that sometimes I would take that home with me. But I love that aspect of my job where I didn't know what I was going to be seeing. I loved working on full moons. I loved working on New Year's Eve. I loved working. If there was a full moon on a Halloween, that was the best. I would volunteer for those shifts. I loved them. I thought it was very vibrant and exciting, and I wanted to live a full life, and I picked a career that certainly provided me with a full life. I have no problem going to visit these elderly people, these senior citizens who are having hip pain, and then they decide that they want to call us at 3:00 in the morning to help them with their pain. I would do these calls all night, because where I was at in my career after 20 years, I'd much rather be doing that getting to know these senior citizens about their lives and helping them out than picking up kids off a highway. I didn't want to do that anymore. And then the camaraderie. This is recently, I was in New York not too long ago. Here's some art pieces that I did when I was there, or some portraits I did when I was there. And I get to travel around the world, and it is a community that we have, our first responder community. And when we go, or when I go, the majority of the time, people don't care that I'm Dan Son or they're familiar with my artwork. But once they know or realize that I'm a paramedic and a firefighter, that's where the connection actually happens. That's when the camaraderie happens, is because I'm one of them. And that's really an incredible profession to be in, where you have that connection with other people doing the same job. This is in Australia. I was so jealous that these firefighters get to wear shorts, because we never got to do that up here in Canada. And once they realized I was a firefighter from Canada, they forced me in their hall, made me eat Vegemite, which was horrible, and they laughed at me. But I knew that was actually a good thing, that they felt that, I was one of them. Here's police officers in Melbourne, Australia. Here's some paramedics there. And yeah, the camaraderie that we have in this profession is really cool. This is again in Melbourne with some paramedics. And I asked them, what kind of calls do you do there? And they're like, yeah, we do lots of shark attacks. I'm like, I've never done a shark attack. I'm in Alberta. Explain that to me. So we walked through it. We staged it. They explained to me what the trauma looked like. I photoshopped that in. And all 4 of these paramedics are surfers in Australia. This is probably the most powerful photo session I ever did. This is less than 30 days. I think it was actually only 2 weeks after the shooting in Las Vegas. And these are the first responders that responded on that shooting there. And with the family's permission, I include Charlie here, the sheriff that died that day, and he's standing there with his crew in this group portrait. This is the most powerful photo session I've ever done. It was really an incredible experience. And it's probably the first time that they were all together in a non-emergency situation. And the photo session was actually secondary to what was actually really going on there during that session. This is in Finland. Finland was great. All the women looked like supermodels, and all the guys had these really cool Viking beards. But it was the same. We all had the same personalities. We all had similar worldviews. Here's one I did in Las Vegas. The paramedic and the flight medic in the middle has this look of indifference. This is called torn, where his peers are fighting for him because he's lost the capacity to fight for himself. He doesn't really care which way he goes. He doesn't have the strength anymore, but peers are fighting for him. And I see this happening all the time, of where we're really trying to help our peers out as far as mental health goes. I get asked to do artwork for areas that I'm not familiar with. I've never worked in this environment, but this is a surgical crew that was doing a AAA repair actually on someone that they knew. You can see the spirit is there, and he actually ended up dying. His aorta busted open, and they weren't able to control the bleeding, and he ended up dying. And they wanted to represent that in artwork, so I sat down, interviewed them, talked to them, and we staged it and photographed it. And as sad as this looks, it was very therapeutic for them because they were able to process it through. So I'm very lucky that I get the opportunity to create artwork in areas that I don't have experience in, like in corrections. And I've been to a lot of correctional facilities and spoken to a lot of corrections officers. And I have a lot of respect for the work that they do and the stresses that they have, as well as communications. The stresses that they go through is really incredible. I have a lot of respect, and I try to support them as much as I can. I got in trouble for a couple reasons on this one. One, someone thought I actually took this picture in the back, and this was an actual photo, which I took as a compliment because that's just my Photoshop, the trauma in there of this guy who tried to kill himself, but just shot his face off instead. And the other one was that women would say, hey, damn, we'd always have her hair up in a pony in this call. I'm like, hey, I'm a bald man. I don't know what the protocols are if to put your hair up in this kind of call. But here are 2 women that look great doing being in a very stressful situation. And I love this picture the way it is. This is my mom in this picture. And my mom doesn't understand my artwork, which is fine. I don't expect everyone to get it. There's a lot of people that do not like my artwork and let me know about it. And I'm totally fine with that. And sometimes my mom does. She'll go, damn, why is it so gross? Why is it so nasty? But I wanted her to be in a picture. This is Stars Air Ambulance, where it's the flight ambulance where I'm from. And I was doing a photo session there, and I wanted mom to come because I wanted a senior citizen to be the patient. And we got to the airport, and she saw the pilots, she saw the helicopters, and so she's like, "Oh, this is so great." So she had no problem being a patient in this picture, being in this art piece, and she loves this one. She thinks it's fantastic. Okay, we're at the end. I'm going to ask you 10 questions. They're just yes or no questions, and be honest and truthful to either yes or no for these questions. 1, do you have repeated, disturbing, and unwanted memories of a stressful experience? 2, do you feel very upset when something reminds you of a stressful experience? 3, have you ever had a period of 1 month or more when most of the time you felt excessively worried or anxious about several things in your life? 4, have you had skipping, racing, or pounding of the heart? 5, do you avoid external reminders of the stressful experience? For example, people, places, conversation, activities, objects, or situations. 6, do you have trouble experiencing positive feelings? For example, being unable to feel happiness or have loving feelings for people close to you. 7, do you have strong negative beliefs about yourself, other people, or the world? For example, having thoughts such as I am bad, there's something seriously wrong with me, no one can be trusted, or the world is completely dangerous. 8, do you have difficulty sleeping, either difficulty falling asleep, waking up in the middle of the night, early morning awakening, or sleeping excessively? 9, do you find it difficult to control the worries, and or do they interfere with your ability to focus on what you were doing? And 10, have you thought a lot about death or felt like you wanted to die? Now, these are 10 questions that I got off the internet. I just Googled online PTSD assessment. Because I'm in Canada, these ones came up from the Canadian Institute for Public Safety Research and Treatment, CIPSR. But when I travel and I'm in the hotel rooms, I Google it, and there's always questionnaires that can come up for a self-assessment. No, I'm not saying that you should Dr. Google yourself and self-diagnose with PTSD. I'm not saying to do that. However, if you feel that you're in an environment or workplace or at home where you don't feel psychologically safe enough to come forward with the concerns you have, you can go online, do a self-assessment, and a lot of resources will come up. And lots of places that are happening now, there's a lot of organizations that have free online resources that you can utilize. And once you fill out these questionnaires, it gives you suggestions on what you can do, gives you phone numbers that you can phone. I always recommend that if you did connect with a lot of those questions or really connected with my experience, then get assessed properly from a mental health professional that ideally has experience in assessing or working with first responders or working with trauma, so that you can get a proper diagnosis. And then with that diagnosis, you can get the treatment that you need. My sister would say, she told me this when I was in a really bad spot. And she said, Dan, one door closes, another one opens. And I'm like, yes, Carrie, I know. But then she said, but no one tells you the hallway's on fire. And for the longest time, I just sat in that burning hallway, and I didn't realize that there was an exit. And I really wanted to just jump out the window. But with help through therapy, someone reached into that room and made me realize that there is an exit. So I remain tragically optimistic. I know it's a heavy topic, but overall, I am a cherry blossom tree. I'm a beautiful pink cherry blossom tree, very optimistic, while still being aware and authentic of the tragedies. Pain plus the willingness to walk into the pain is where the growth is going to be. It's the willingness to walk into the pain. So thank you very much, everybody. I'd love to share this as much as I can to get the word out. I'm hoping that maybe someone maybe connected to it the way that I connected to that psychologist, and it may encourage someone to get the help that they need. And that's it.
I'll just sum it up by saying you cover so much ground and so much positivity in the midst of the post-traumatic growth story that I think it will touch anybody that watches it, and they'll take something away from it that will benefit them. So it's just an amazing service you're doing by sharing this presentation.
Yeah, well, thank you. It's very therapeutic for me too to do it. The more I talk about it, the more I express it, the better I feel about it. And I hope that other people can connect. Like now that I am a mental health professional as well, I'm also a peer, though. I'm also, and I been doing this presentation and the artwork long before. I think it's been 10 years now. I did the first one, and I think about it now. 10 years is a long time.
Yes.
There is it's weird to say there's a positivity to it, but there can be. I think it's an important message.
Well, we thank you for your vulnerability, Dan. Every time we get to see you, we feel like we get to know you better, and you're going to be a wonderful therapist.
Oh, well, thanks. Yeah, thank you.
And one thing I'd like to add is that this presentation, it gives permission, to other first responders to take seriously what they're experiencing and to get the help that they need. So thank you for the presentation.
Yeah, well, my pleasure. Yeah, thank you very much. It's nice of you to say.
There's one aspect to this presentation and your work, which I think is really understated in our profession. And I love the fact that you embrace it. You're willing to talk about it. You're willing to bring it to the forefront. And that's death. And that's how, we were not really taught or trained how to deal with death, maybe on a very administrative level, but not as human beings doing the job that we do. And the way that you're able to explain it, talk about it is, I think it's so vitally important to make that part of the conversation because, obviously it's affecting us spiritually, emotionally, morally. And so I think it's just so important to include it in the conversation.
Yeah, that's a big topic, Dave, right there. It's really something that was really skimmed over in my training as far as what a massive component death was going to be in this profession and what it actually meant. And it affected me in many different ways for me personally. And then how, if I even think about the death notification of the opportunity that first responders have to make such a profound difference in families at that critical time. And I think that training is, I know Dr. Alexandra Jabber, a friend of mine, she kind of specializes in death notifications. I don't know if she's been on your show. If she hasn't, she should be. She's amazing. She's so great. But that's kind of her thing, is doing proper death notifications and showing us that the opportunities that we have to be there with the families that can have an effect for the rest of their lives.
Absolutely. And, obviously it's a whole other topic we could probably spend easily another episode on. But I think it comes up in our world, how we are, as unique as the job is, we do get to be with people in those moments when they may be passing on. And that can be a deeply spiritual and profound moment where we can make a difference in that transition, in that life moment. So, I think, as you said, we kind of gets glossed over in the, in our training as we begin our careers and doesn't necessarily come up again. Hopefully this will start to open the door to having those conversations and maybe looking at it a little differently.
Yeah. Being, like you said, being there with people as they're dying. What an incredible, it's weird to say that's an opportunity, but what an incredible position to be in.
Right.
That we can be there for people next to birth, the most significant moment of their life.
Sacred moments.
Right. To be there with them. But then also be there with the families to help them through that most critical moment. And then also reflect on how those experiences are, how they affect us. And it can be a very positive experience to have the privilege to be. And when I say that I wanted to become a paramedic because I want to live life on the edge, man, it doesn't get any more on the edge than that. Right? You are there at the moment for people like that. That's where I wanted to be, and it certainly didn't disappoint. And I think I benefited overall because of it.
Well, truly a life-altering experience for us as responders and also for the public that we interact with. So, Daniel, like I said, no words to describe how grateful we are to have you here again doing this presentation, sharing your work and your journey. Just share with us where people can find you, any upcoming events. You mentioned one. I know you've got several presentations now, so just give us a little kind of snapshot where you're going to be speaking.
I'm going to be busy this fall. I'll be at EMS World in September. I'm going to be in Salt Lake City. I'm going to be in Biloxi. I'm going to be. You can go on my website, dansonphotos.com, and there's a list of all the go-to events, and I have all the places that I'm going to be at. And I love doing that. I love that I have the opportunities that I get to travel and meet people and see my peers and give this presentation in person. And that's probably the best part about being Dan's son is meeting all my fellow first responders and peers. So, and then now I'm hoping to. Well, I know I am because I'll be doing that. I've got bookings already to do actually full workshops on lots of different topics, which is great.
Fantastic. All right, so check out Daniel's website. And again, we appreciate your generosity for sharing this with us and our audience and all you're doing out there in your chapter after firefighter paramedics. So many thanks.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for the opportunity, David and Stacey. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Remember to like and subscribe YouTube, Respond to Resilience, Facebook, Respond to Wellness Inc., and Responder TV, LinkedIn, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and please check out our website, respondertv.com, for past episodes and guest information. Till the next time, stay safe, be kind to yourself. Take care.